Good morning, committee. We're going to go ahead and get started. Since we're not taking action, we are going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 374. Amelia, will you give us an overview? Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill number 374 relates to property taxation and would discontinue the property tax exemption for new developments of renewable energy facilities. Currently, KSA 79-201-11th generally provides an exemption from property tax for all property actually and regularly used predominantly to produce and generate electricity utilizing renewable energy resources or technologies, except when an applicant files an application for exemption or files an application and received a conditional use permit after December 31st of 2016. In that case, the exemption granted is limited to the 10 taxable years following completion or of construction or installation. The bill would discontinue the granting of new exemptions under the provisions of this subsection. The 10-year exemption would be limited to properties where the applicant after December 31st, 2016 and on or before December 31st, 2022, filed the exemption application or filed the application and received a conditional use permit. No exemptions would be granted under the provisions of the subsection unless the applicant on or before December 31st, 2022 files an application or receives their conditional use permit. The bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book, and I would be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Committee, our first proponent for the bill is Aaron Popalka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, I'm Aaron Popalka with the Kansas Livestock Association. We support Senate Bill 374, and I want everybody to understand we're a membership-driven organization, and so if I stand up here, it's because of policies adopted by our membership at our annual meeting. And one of the policies I'll share with you today that's been on our books longer than I've been at KLA for over 10 years, and this has been on our books for that long, and it's this. Kansas Livestock Association supports legislation to require wind power facilities to pay local property taxes. It's just that simple. And I think part of this, one, there's a couple reasons for this. One, when these facilities come into small areas, they do put a tax on roads, local infrastructure, whether it's local safety, police, as workers influx. There's certain burdens on the system. If they're not paying, other folks pick up the burden. In rural areas, that's farmers and ranchers and local homeowners. I think the other is a fairness issue. When my members build a feed yard, a swine facility, machine shed, home, those go on the property tax rolls immediately at fair market value and assessed 25% assessment rate, same as any other commercial, commercial property. I think the other issue too is because of this 10-year exemption, often what's done is they make what are called payment in lieu of taxes. It's not really the case because there are no taxes. It's just money. And that money is often used to leverage commissions. Don't do setbacks. Don't do zoning that would help protect some local landowners or provide some setbacks. By putting them on the rolls, we wouldn't see that sort of situation occur anymore. So those three simple things, we'd simply ask you to consider this bill and move it favorably. Thank you. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Aaron. Committee, any questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Aaron, good morning. How are you today, buddy?
Good. How are you?
All right, so let's get into it here. Where do you guys stand on property tax exemptions for fossil fuels like pipelines and things like that?
We don't have a policy, so if you did a bill, we wouldn't be up here for or against it.
Okay. I'm curious, your ranchers, do they have a lot of fossil fuel investments? Do they have crickets and are they pumping stuff out of the ground? And what's their interest in fossil fuel energy?
Well, Senator, I would imagine, I couldn't give you a number because our members don't exactly disclose it, but I imagine some folks have some oil leases. I imagine others have leases just like many of our members have wind leases. We're kind of a free market organization, so, you know, if you want to enter the leases, enter the leases.
Okay, but just so I understand, your big support of this bill is because your perception from your base is that basically wind isn't paying its fair share, right?
Our policy that's adopted by our members says that we'd like them to contribute to the local tax base.
Okay, so, and just so we're on the same page, you realize the rural tax base across Kansas, rural counties, they don't have the valuation to currently support their services as is, correct?
I don't know if that's accurate. Depends on the county.
Well, I would, Madam Chair, just a few more things. I would.
Senator, please hurry. We have a full venue today.
Okay, I just want to make the point with the Con-Free, Madam Chair, that I find it interesting he's concerned about this property tax exemption, when in fact, rural Kansas itself, if you look at the valuation base of rural counties, they can't pay for their services, and typically you're seeing a drain from the state general fund that goes to those counties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I would say that's inaccurate. It depends on the county, and, but we will debate that another day. We can go over that when we have the hearing, informational hearing on valuations. Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, thanks for being here. Do you have any knowledge or information in regard to whether these tax credits or incentives have anything to do with the profitability of any of these renewables justifying their existence? If they wouldn't have them, would we not have these wind generation systems? Is it all balanced on that, or do you have any idea?
I couldn't answer that question, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Aaron? Thank you, Aaron. Committee, our next conferee is Senator Thompson. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee. I appreciate it very much. I can't answer that question for you, and I will here in just a minute as I get through the testimony. In fact, I've got quite a bit of testimony on this. I'm not going to read it verbatim. I'm going to jump around just a little bit. First of all, as to the oil and gas issue, the wind companies will try to confuse you by claiming that this will impact the oil and gas industry in Kansas. It will absolutely not. If you look at the bill, it talks specifically about renewables. Second, the renewable industry is now a mature industry. These incentives were provided at a time when it was back in the earlier days, 2007, when there weren't many of these turbines around. But since then, we now have about 4,000 turbines in the state of Kansas, with 6,500 additional turbines coming online in the near future, including also an awful lot of solar energy that's in the Sustainable Transformation Plan from Evergy. Now, this would affect both of those by forcing them to pay property tax, whereas they do not. But I want to focus on the wind turbines because I think that's where we do have some better numbers since there's more of that within the state. And as you'll see, we're bending over backwards to subsidize these industries that are basically using our state as a giant electrical industrial revenue source until it becomes unprofitable, and then they will abandon. And I'll guarantee you they're doing it in California. We're going to be stuck with the decommissioning costs. Right now, estimated cost for decommissioning is about $1 billion, $1 million per turbine. So with 4,000 turbines, we're talking $4 billion. We have zero plan in this state for how to pay for it. Is the county going to do it? Will the landowner have to do it? Will the wind industry do it? We don't have questions of that, and there's nothing that tells us where we're going with that. Currently with these facilities, they pay what is called a payment in lieu of tax, which is a mere fraction of what they would pay in property taxes. And unfortunately, that was done to promote the proliferation of these industries, and now we've gone from below normal electrical rates in this state to above normal because we've had to add all the transmission lines that go along with it, all the extra generating peaking power to compensate for when wind and solar is not online. And they claim to make up for the unpaid property tax with these pilot funds, the payment in lieu of taxes, but they don't work for several reasons. And first of all, these pilots are negotiated at the county level. Thus, the dollar amounts can vary widely from county to county. The counties are not required to share these funds with the schools. In some cases, I have a letter from a Barber County superintendent that can see a turbine outside of his window at his school and doesn't get a dime from these turbines. The pilots can be cut off at any time since they're not regulated and not contracted. And most importantly, pilot funds are paid at an estimated $96 million less than what should be paid. Now, you're going to see a number of different numbers. It could be 96 million, it could be 39 million. Using the wind company's own numbers, they say they're paying $39 million less. The trouble is getting accurate numbers. They deliberately make it very difficult to decipher the numbers and to verify the numbers. So let's just dive into one example. And to get the best numbers I could, I made calls to Coffee County, where the Waverly Wind Farm is located. This wind project began paying pilots to Coffee County in 2015. They paid for 6 years. I got the data. So as of their latest information they gave to me yesterday, they've received $3,127,000 in lieu of property tax. If you break that down, each turbine with an original cost of $4 million has paid approximately $5,800 each year to the county. $5,800 per year for a $4 million turbine. I pay $6,800 on my 3,000 square foot house in Johnson County per year in property tax. I cannot depreciate my property, they can. And on the depreciated property value of the turbines, they would still pay about $1,000 less per year than I do. They pay an effective rate of about 8.9%. I pay 11.9%. Now, back to this number from Coffee County in $3,127,000 in lieu of property taxes so far in 6 years. I'd asked for a compilation of the pilots that have been paid so far. And I received this number, which I confirmed from the revisers when they provided this to me, a list of the amount that was reported contributions by the wind company. Now again, the Coffee County numbers, $3,127,000. The wind company says $20,281,000. You do the math, it would take 40 years at the current compensation rate of pilots to reach the number they're reporting. So what number are they giving me? I can't figure this out. That's why we're having a hard time getting good numbers from them. And on top of that, there was an article published in 2017 that shows that Kansas were shortchanged by $59 million in 2017 alone on property taxes. I've got all sorts of stuff here, but the bottom line is they're depreciating these turbines rapidly on the current schedule. They're depreciating within 7 years. They say the life cycle of these things are 25 years. Why are we allowing that? They get production tax credits of $15 per megawatt hour from the federal government through our taxpayer dollar. That's 3/4 of the cost of the average wholesale electricity in the state of Kansas. So before they produce an ounce of electricity, they're getting subsidized at 3/4 of the cost. On top of that, they can do virtual power purchase agreements, which allows them to give a company some distant location tax credits. They take the money as a backdoor subsidy, and lo and behold, they can produce electricity at virtual zero cost. And yet we are bending over backwards to subsidize these multinational, multi-billion-dollar wind companies in the state of Kansas. I could go on, but I think I'm going to just stand for questions, and I can answer anything the committee wants to know. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Committee questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator, I presume this is your bill that you brought forward?
I helped craft, with the help of the revisers and research and number of experts, yes.
So just let me, a statement, Madam Chair, and then I have a number of questions for the senator. So first of all, please understand, I truly appreciate you bringing this bill, not because I necessarily support it, but I appreciate the concept being brought up. Because as we look across Kansas, we see this transition, at least from my limited perspective, of going from fossil fuel energy that has been used to generate electricity to renewables. And from a standpoint of the taxation committee, when it comes to basically, basically assessed valuation, property taxes coming into those counties, how we run government, this is a very critical discussion to have. Thank you. So my point to you would be is number one, do you support, you talked about this being a maturing industry, getting rid of those subsidies. Would you also support getting rid of the subsidies we have in place for fossil fuel generation, given that is obviously not only a maturing, but a dying industry?
Let me make 2 comments on that. First of all, the renewables, the solar and wind, can't exist without the fossil fuel industry because, first of all, there's about 200 and some gallons of lubricants inside each one of the turbines. Second of all, when the wind does not blow, we have to have natural gas peaking generation to compensate for that. We are paying for that now. Also, every barrel of oil produced in the state of Kansas is taxed 5 times before it reaches the end user. So they are already paying their fair share, billions and billions of dollars. The wind companies are paying a mere fraction. They're getting subsidized through taxpayer dollars. The fossil fuel industry makes renewables possible. It takes one turbine, 500 tons. It takes almost that same amount of coal to produce a turbine. They can have rare earth minerals, about 1,000 pounds of neodymium and dysprosium in each turbine that is mined in China. We are supporting China to produce these things. 98% of the solar panels come from China. There are all sorts of toxins. There are all sorts of things that we haven't even considered in this, and we need to have the fossil fuel industry to give us our base load power that we rely on 24/7.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it sounds like you don't support moving those subsidies. One final question, just so we're all on the same page here. Are there organizations in the industry that are currently compensating you to, I guess, support anti-renewable legislation?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morning.
Morning, Senator.
Like you talked a little bit about this industry being a mature industry, and I would assume with that, some of these wind turbines and equipment is reaching its full lifetime use. What happens to that material and that equipment afterwards? Where does it get disposed of and how?
Currently, the blades are not disposable at all. I mean, they have to put them in landfills, and we're doing so. They are not recyclable. It's either a fiberglass resin type of material used in those blades. Some of the newer ones are using carbon resin in the blades. They weigh 38 tons, the blade assemblies. In fact, they're going to get even bigger. With regard to recycling, one turbine, like I said, can weigh 500 tons. If you try to recycle that much steel, your recycling costs or the wholesale cost of recycled steel goes to zero. You end up having to pay somebody to take that off your hands because you're going to flood the market with all this steel. So it just creates all sorts of problems, and we don't have a plan for it. I talked to an expert back 3 years ago, long before I got in Senate or even decided to do this, about the decommissioning costs. And he said, we're not considering the full cost. These new turbines are going to be 650 feet tall. So the costs are likely going to increase, plus the inflationary cycle that we're seeing right now is going to increase the cost as well. So we've got some real problems on our hand, and we're just not looking at it. And this is just a minor piece of asking them to contribute to our state coffers, to our schools, to our counties. And with regard to the roads, as Aaron Popelka mentioned, I've heard from a lot of counties where the construction phase just is tearing up these roads, and they're not getting compensated for that cost. And to Senator Holland's point, a lot of these small communities, they can't pay their bills now. We need to have them compensated for that.
Any other questions, committee? I have a couple. So the abandoned well fund, that oil and gas, would you, would it be acceptable to amend the bill to put something similar for
Sure.
turbines? Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you. Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next conferee is Dave Trebert.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Dave Trebert, CEO, Kansas Policy Institute. We are very happy to be here in support of Senate Bill 374. We don't believe government should be picking winners and losers, which is the upshot of this exemption. I mean, ironically, the state charges property tax and severance tax to the oil and gas industry, where we have this exemption for renewables. And those taxes are passed on. So effectively, the state is raising the cost of home heating oil and other forms of energy while giving an exemption to their competitors. Eliminating this also gives an opportunity to local officials to reduce property taxes. If you expand the base, they have the opportunity at least to use that revenue to reduce the pressure on everyone else. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Dave. Committee, any questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dave, thanks for being here. I appreciate your statements. Just a couple things, a statement and some questions, Madam Chair. First of all, I appreciate your
You've made your statement, Senator, and I'm sorry, but we are on a time crunch today. So I appreciate it. Would you address your
Okay,
questions to
very
the
good. I
conferee?
just think this is meaty issues, and we need to have a thorough debate of this. So my question would be, Madam Chair, do you support removing the subsidies against the fossil fuel industry? Look at all the property taxes exemption for pipelines and petroleum infrastructure. Would you support getting rid of that?
Which subsidies are you, which state and local subsidies are you addressing?
Just in general,
But are there, which state and local subsidies?
just read through the statute books. We have a plethora of tax subsidies provided to the fossil.
So we would be very interested in having a discussion of eliminating all subsidies, not just on oil, fossil fuels or renewables, but all of them. Like the $1 billion subsidy this legislature just voted to give to one company. So absolutely, let's have that conversation.
Thank you. If we could stay on topic, Senator Holland.
Well, and that's, I'm sure the statement I want to make is that, just so everybody understands, the legislature picks winners and losers every time. We just spent $1.6 billion on a corporation. We're waiting to hear the results of that. So my point is, the legislature is always betting on the come on new technologies. I appreciate what we've done for wind and renewables in the past. I think the question is, as that starts to mature, how do we handle that from a taxing standpoint? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And committee, just a reminder, I would like to get to both sides, the proponents and the opponents. So thank you. Any other questions for Dave? Seeing none, thank you. Committee, would anybody else like to testify as a proponent for the bill? I would draw your attention to David Fisher's testimony, written only. Opponents, Kimberly Swati, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Kimberly Ginter-Swati, and it is a pleasure to be here. As I was telling Senator Tyson, I do try and make it a point to never be before a tax or appropriations, so sorry about that. So I'm going to deviate quite a bit from my written comments because there's been a tremendous amount of misinformation put forth this morning, and I do feel like I'm going to take some time to address some of those comments. And then also, I am standing here and am dismayed because I feel like this piece of legislation and those that have supported it have tried to make a claim that it is one industry versus another industry. And that is absolutely not the way the Kansas Advanced Power Alliance and our member companies view our relationship with our oil and gas brethren. Some of our members include companies that are just in the renewable energy space, such as wind and solar and battery storage and EVs. But also our members include BP and Shell and Exxon and Chevron. In fact, Savion Energy, which is based in Kansas City, Missouri, and is a spinoff of Tradewind Energy, they were just 6 weeks ago bought by Shell. So we do understand that there is a longstanding relationship between oil and gas and renewables. Yes, we also understand that there is a transition occurring. But to talk about that we are competitors or that's just not how we viewed ourselves in the state of Kansas over the last 20 years. And I think when you look at oil and gas and you look at the way they receive some of their tax treatments, that's an extractive-based economy. You're actually pulling something of good out of the earth and using it. And it's used in state, it's used out of state, it's used all around the world. And generally, the state of Kansas has applauded that. And in the case of renewable energy, we're not pulling anything out of the earth. We're actually just utilizing the wind and the solar that exists. And we are using that both within state and we are using it out of state as well. So we also talk about fairness and parity. And I think that the proponent from the KLA talked about the roads and whatnot. And I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about how we engage with our communities. One of the first agreements that we sign and we negotiate with communities is a road maintenance agreement. And that says, yes, we acknowledge the fact that when we come into a community, we're going to do damage to roads because we've got heavy cranes, we've got heavy trucks, and we are going to do damage. So we are going to compensate the communities for that. That's a road maintenance agreement, very important element. And we continue to pay over time for that road maintenance agreement for the daily in and out, daily wear and tear on those roads. We rebuild bridges, we take county roads and we asphalt them just to make sure that they can handle our equipment. We also have fire and safety agreements with emergency providers. So again, that burden does not just fall on the counties. So I think there's a bit of a fundamental misunderstanding about how it is the renewable energy industry works with our host communities. So to the specific provisions of the bill. The legislature did, in the mid-90s, pass a piece of legislation that granted a property tax exemption for renewable energy. And at the time, it was a life of the property tax exemption. It was a life of the project exemption. And in speaking with the authors of the bill, who are still alive today, although they're not serving in the legislature anymore, their desire was absolutely to attract the industry to the state, just like they gave a property tax exemption to the Keystone Pipeline, which was literally always coming through the state of Kansas. But in the case of renewable energy, there was competition for where projects were going to be developed, and they wanted to make sure that Kansas was in the middle of it. I can tell you right now that I know that none of those initial authors thought that in a matter of 20 years, there would be 40 renewable energy projects operating in the state. And that was one of the reasons why we felt compelled to and advocated for the 2015 change that created parity for all forms of electric generation operating in the state of Kansas, whether it's transmission line, a pipeline, or any other type of electric generation that was not nuclear, that we were all going to enjoy a 10-year property tax exemption. The difference is that in the case of renewable energy, we're also paying a payment in lieu of taxes, and that is not something that any other form of generation or transmission line pays. And I'm not suggesting that they should pay it, but we do pay it. It was started in 2001, and every other project since then has been paying that pilot. I do have a full spreadsheet on the numbers, and to Senator Thompson's point, yes, in the case of the Waverly Wind Farm, they have paid several $1 million thus far, and over the life of the project, that's the $20 million number he's been referring to. There typically is a cost escalator associated with that payment in lieu of taxes fees as well. So you have a road maintenance agreement, and you have decommissioning, which decommissioning is paid for either via a surety bond or an escrow account set up with the counties. It's included in a landowner's lease with the county that they are not going to be on the hook, neither is the county, to pay for decommissioning cost. It already exists in contracts, both with the landowners and with the counties when it comes to decommissioning. So decommissioning, road maintenance agreement, pilot agreement. When it comes to competition, Kansas is absolutely in competition every single day for renewable energy projects. The largest purchasers of renewables now are what we call C&I customers, commercial and industrial customers. These are the companies that they can go anywhere in the United States to pick their renewable energy projects from. So anytime Evergy issues an RFP for a renewable energy project, they might get 80 or 90 projects from which they could choose. That is intense competition. That means every single day, Kansas must put its best foot forward if we are interested in the jobs and investment associated with each particular renewable energy project. Maybe the state of Kansas has decided that that's not something that it's interested in anymore, and the states around us will absolutely stand up and applaud and will say, great, Oklahoma, they have just as good of a resource, they have more projects, and for a long time, they had a state production tax credit because they wanted to make sure that every day of the week they were beating Kansas wind projects on economics, not just on the amount of power produced. So we would gladly have a conversation again with members of the legislature about what property tax looks like for renewable energy projects or oil and gas, transmission, the ag industry, for every other industry that takes advantage of the, $8 billion in property tax exemptions that are given out every single year, all of which, though, as a cumulative effect, have brought new jobs, economic growth, financial prosperity to the state of Kansas. So all boats do rise in that instance. I'm more than happy, there's much more to cover. I'm more than happy to have an additional conversation about property taxes, the property tax exemption for renewables, but I think that it's imperative that we understand that we did recognize that there was an inherent disparity between a life of a project exemption to now a 10-year property tax exemption that all forms of generation, with the exception of nuclear, do enjoy within the state of Kansas. So with that, I'll be happy to stand for questions and provide the opportunity for others to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Committee, any questions? I have a couple. Senator Holland.
So sorry.
Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what happened in 2015 again?
Yes, so in 2015, there was legislation to repeal the renewable portfolio standard and then also to repeal the property tax exemption. And it was also to go back retroactive to repeal the property tax exemption. So an agreement was created that said, yes, we would move forward with making the renewable portfolio standard mandatory. We had already hit the 20% by 2020, 5 years early. So we made the renewable portfolio standard voluntary from mandatory. And then we moved to a 10-year property tax exemption from a life of the project exemption. And also, Senator, the other component of that agreement was the industry walked away from machinery and equipment. So we are probably one of the only industries in the state of Kansas that cannot take advantage in any way, shape, or form of the machinery and equipment property tax exemption. That was the 2015 agreement.
So at what point do we bring all these energy assets back online from a property taxation standpoint?
So for the projects that have a 20-year exemption, they have the pilot agreements in place. And as those projects go through repowering, that's a conversation that those projects are having with each individual county. We have only had 2 projects repower at this point, and one project went ahead and just extended their pilot agreement at the request of the counties. I'm not sure what the other county has done. But for all new projects going forward, it's a 10-year exemption, 10-year pilot, and then on the property tax rolls on year 11.
Madam Chair, just final comment real quick. I think that's a big problem. We need to put these assets back on the tax rolls. We need to have a plan for doing that. Perpetual exemptions is not the answer. Thank you.
Any other? Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Thanks for being here. Do you know what fields or wind farms or whatever you want to call them are owned by the fossil fuel industry here in Kansas?
Actually, Senator, I do have a listing of projects that are owned by companies that are, so BP owned and developed several of the assets that exist, largely the Flat Ridge Complex. Shell just bought Savion, so they don't have any operating assets within the state of Kansas yet. I know they're working on developing some projects. we have, and I'm just trying to think here, another example would be NextEra Energy Resources LLC is a highly diversified utility company that also has oil and gas interests throughout the United States, and they have a multitude of operating wind farms in the state. So we do coexist. We also have, one of the things I love about the Flat Ridge 2 project is we have a number of landowners that have oil and gas, pump jacks right there on the ground, and then they have right next to them, they have turbines up above. So again, it's just an actual visual symbol of the fact that this, in the state of Kansas at least, oil and gas and renewables have coexisted for 20 years peacefully.
Senator Solontrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Follow-up question. Would you be opposed to this change in the taxation be applicable to any fossil fuel company that may be purchasing these assets simply because of their advantageous tax treatment?
So Senator, from the industry standpoint, I think that if we are going to have a conversation about how we handle energy and property tax exemption, we need to look across the board at how energy is taxed or not taxed within the state of Kansas. I don't think that because of the fact that Kansas has had a long history of being an energy exporter, and we've prided ourselves on that fact, I don't think that it would be fair or good public policy to say to one industry or another industry that we're going to take away X, Y, or Z when we're not doing a full-scale reflection of what our property tax and tax policy is across the energy sector.
Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So just dovetailing off what you just said, are you saying to the legislature, unless you're going to look across the board at everything, it's a non-starter? We have to look at everything. I quite frankly think right now we're in the midst of a conversation. We are in the midst of a conversation. And sometimes you have to start in one area and then move forward.
Absolutely, Senator. No, and I appreciate that question. I think the challenge is when you're talking about how are we producing energy for the state of Kansas, whether it's energy for transportation fuel or energy for home heating or for lighting, to single out one industry is a bit of a challenge because you're not focusing on the whole of the energy space.
Well, I understand. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce has said it's unfair to target this sector. You're saying target, they're saying unfair, target. I think we're saying we're starting here. We're starting here. So that does lead me to my next questions. How many decommissioned turbines do we have in the state of Kansas?
So, Senator, it's a great question. We've actually not had a wind farm be decommissioned at this point. And when
So how many have been replaced?
We have had no entire wind farms that have been replaced
I'm
at
not
this
talking
point.
about wind farms.
Turbines.
Yes.
Senator, I will get back with you on that. No, at this point, I don't believe it could be said that the entirety of a wind turbine has been placed, but for possibly one or two when a tornado came through in Kingman County. There have been some projects that have received new nacelles, or some wind turbines that have received new nacelles, or a couple that have received a couple new blades, or some that have had new software installed. But aside from in 2012, when the tornado came through and hit the tower in Kingman County, I don't think that we've had a full-scale turbine be entirely replaced.
So what is the plan with regard to recycling?
Oh, so first, if a project would be decommissioned, that exists. We have the surety bond, we have the escrow account, that is all negotiated with the county and with the landowners. And when it comes to recyclability, that is a growing issue that the industry is working on. So we're working on.
It's an existing issue. It's been an issue since they were first put up at any place in the United States. When you know something has a lifespan, you've got to do something with what ends up being waste or trash. So it's an existing issue. It's not growing. Well, it is growing. But what is the plan? What is the plan for if blades need to be replaced, if something has to be replaced?
Thank you, Senator. No, it's to recycle them. And so.
In what way?
Well, so right now we can grind them up and we can use them for, like the equivalent of MDF or the manufactured board. We're working on them to be used. We actually have some pilot projects here in Kansas that they're being used as bridges. So we don't have turbines just in Kansas, at least, going into landfills. It is something that we are continuing to work on, and there are a lot of different companies that are in that space now as to how we recycle turbines. But at this point, bridges and trying to use them in like flooring and things of that sort is what we're working on. But I will say, also, there are a lot of other industries that continue to need to work through what they do with the disposal of their waste or whatnot. I mean, I look at the fashion industry all the time, and rather than give their clothes, they
have to
burn them.
We're going to have to stay on
Yeah.
topic on
No,
property
please.
tax. I let you go off a little bit there, both of you. Are there any other questions on this bill first? Okay, I have a couple. The abandoned well tax fee that you guys do not pay, that would be acceptable then because it is currently going on in the abandoned well oil. Would that be correct?
I would love to see how that would impact decommissioning, but in the agreements, so we can do a side-by-side, but that would be something that we could make sure we have the policies in place with the state of Kansas, with the counties. So maybe it's not called abandoned oil and gas well plugging, maybe it is just decommissioning. But yes, let's absolutely look at that.
Also, the life of the turbine, you are extending the life by changing the blades, so that 7-year depreciation would not be an accurate number. And 20-year sounds like it would not be an accurate number because there are turbines that have been in place longer than 20 years in the state of Kansas.
So typically it's a 10-year depreciation in Kansas, and so we have had some projects that have changed.
And you have a 10-year property tax abatement. So
Yes,
the math doesn't add up, right? I mean, it's zero. Okay. And I also, and this is a little bit off, but you did mention that you are not competition for the oil.
yeah.
Yeah, then why did we have legislation that required 20% renewable?
So oil and gas is largely used for transportation fuels. We do have some natural gas that is used in home heating, but generally speaking, we're using renewable energy, wind and solar in Kansas for electricity.
Yes, and
So,
yes.
yes, absolutely, but for electricity. So a different type of use in the energy space.
Okay. Are there any other questions, Committee for Kimberly? Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your testimony.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Last, we have Alan Kloss Anderson, and we are almost out of time for committee. That's why I was trying to keep us on topic.
I appreciate that. So I'll try to be brief and answer what I can, and I won't be able to address, there was a lot of misinformation that's provided about those things. I'd love to talk about those, and that's worthy of a conversation, but we won't have time here. So I'm Alan Kloss Anderson. I'm the Vice Chair of the Energy Practice Group at the Polsinelli Law Firm. We're about 1,000 lawyers across the country. Our Energy Practice Group similarly works across the country. I'm also Adjunct Professor of Law at the University of Kansas School of Law, where I teach on this topic from renewable energy. So the first and foremost, the bill, purports obviously to be a removal of the property tax on renewable energy property. In the testimony, there seems to be a complete confusion on personal property and real property. So people are saying these things are on personal property or someone's home. That's real property. Renewable energy projects have real property property tax starting on day one as well. So there's a confusion even what is in this bill. So that's the first part. The second, let's talk about winners and losers. So here is what's already in the books on property tax exemption. Of course, renewables, 10 years. Baseload public utility generation, 10 years. Nuclear generation, 10 years. Oil and gas pipeline property, 10 years. Biomass, 10 years. Refinery property, 10 years. Baseload independent coal gasification power plants, 12 years. Landfill gas property, lifetime exemption. Oil lease, certain oil leases with production 5 barrels or less, lifetime exemption. And of course, farm machinery and equipment is lifetime exemption. So the main point of this first is renewable energy is already at the most disfavored status of other energy projects. So keeping them on the same level is what makes sense. And so if there is going to be a conversation, I'll talk about what it would do to add it to one source and not the others, but that's the first point. It already is at the lowest level of any other generation. So the next point is when it gets into what would happen if you do add a tax to one form of electricity generation and only that one. So first of all, we have to understand, this has been alluded to already, it is an independent power project. In Kansas, we are a member of the Southwest Power Pool, which is part of the generation that goes from the Canadian border into the panhandle of Texas. So an independent power project that is supplying power into that, whether they're commercial and industrial customers, which was described by Senator Thompson, but if it's one of those, or to our own utilities, it can locate within a myriad of different places. So it has options to be in different locations. One of the biggest factors, not the only factor, of where a project's located is, of course, going to be, is it economically viable? So when we add a tax to one source of renewable generation, it does one of two things, and it can only do one of two things. It either is going to make that project not viable in Kansas, and it absolutely will move to another location. 100% tax of zero is zero. And so the economic impact of taxing one source and making it not viable is that it will go to another location. I assure you the people of Nebraska, the Dakotas, Oklahoma, and a myriad of other places will celebrate a bill that only taxes renewable energy and lets them take on the economic benefit. It would mean that people can't use their own property rights to participate in one of these projects if it's taken out because of economics. It doesn't let those local communities have the benefits of that. And the people you don't hear asking for this are those local communities, because they work great in those counties and places where these are located. The second option is, if we add a tax to this source of generation, but yet it's still viable in the competitive marketplace of electricity generation, it will increase that cost. It is too competitive. This is the free market. Renewable energy is the one that's competing in a brutal marketplace, so it drives the price down. It's been an absolute great thing for the state of Kansas and our electricity rates. So if we raise it across the board, that will go into our rates. So this, from an economic standpoint, is obvious. It will be at best a wash, and it will go to the ratepayers. It won't go to the company. It won't go to the utility. It'll go to the ratepayers because it'll have to be spread out there. And the good news is, and this is in the materials I submitted to you, is we have an example of some legislature that made this mistake, and that's Wyoming. Wyoming is a lot like Kansas, has a great resource. Projects were coming to Wyoming. So between 1999 and 2000, more than 14 megawatts was installed. From 2008 to 2010, as you would expect, it had a really big increase of projects, 1,200 megawatts essentially installed in Wyoming in that short period. Wyoming adds a tax, a generation tax to projects. There's not another project for the next 7 years. So they got 100% tax on nothing, no new projects. But guess who benefited from those projects? The neighboring states. Those projects did go somewhere. Colorado thanks Wyoming for that mistake. I hope we won't make that same mistake, because that's the only two things that can happen. I'll take questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Anderson, do you represent or have a business relationship with NextEra?
With NextEra Energy? Yes, I represent. So I represent NextEra. I represent most developers in the state. I've had the good fortune of working on most projects in the state and working in those counties where they're located. So NextEra included.
Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here today, Alan. Question for you. This is the policy debate discussion I want to have. Does it make sense for us to subsidize any sort of energy generation in the state where that energy goes out and does not directly benefit consumers versus subsidizing energy generation that is used by Kansans? That is a question I have for you and what your thoughts are on that.
So there's a couple parts to that. The first is that Kansas is an export market in a lot of different things. Obviously, we do that with agriculture interests. Most of that is exported out. We do that with oil and gas. It's a world market for oil and natural gas, or world market in oil and a bigger market for natural gas. In this case, as I described, we're in the Southwest Power Pool, so from the Dakotas to the Texas border. So any energy that is injected into the grid actually does benefit Kansas ratepayers because it creates more supply. And so from just a pure economic standpoint, it does benefit those. Then from just an economic perspective, it is, I don't think you'd want to hurt those that have the appearance of export when it's going particularly into the grid locally. So if there was to be a look at the different energy sources as a global, I think that could be an interesting conversation generally. But from right now, renewables are already at the lowest, favored, including things that export outside the state.
Any other questions, committee? Thank you for your testimony. Committee, I draw your attention to Ken Eccles' opponent testimony from the Kansas Chamber. Is there anybody that would like to testify in opposition? Is there any neutral? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 374. Committee, I would draw your attention to SCR 1620. It was referred back to committee yesterday. Committee, what are your wishes? Senator Holland.
Just a point of information, help me out. What does that mean when a bill gets referred back to the committee?
Means it's back in committee.
Does that mean leadership doesn't like our work product? What does that mean? Do we know?
I can't speak for leadership. The bill, it was sent back to committee.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Solentrop. Oh, no. Anybody? Seeing none, I guess we'll pick this up tomorrow. Committee, the bill the resolution that we kicked out had a November date on it. So the debate is, should the resolution be on the November ballot or the August ballot? Senator Kloss.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If we're working the resolution, I would propose an amendment to change that to the August ballot.
Committee, there's an amendment. It's been moved by Senator Kloss, seconded by Senator Peck, to change the November ballot to August on the 1620 resolution, SCR. Any discussion on the motion? Senator Holland.
Yeah, I would ask the good senator from Salina why.
If the senator wishes to respond, he may.
He does.
Senator Kloss.
Madam Chair, there are other amendments that are on the August ballot. It makes sense to just have them all together on the ballot for August.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Oh, Senator Holland. No, you're Senator Holland.
I'll wait until we run the tracks,
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. No. Would you like to be recorded?
Yes.
Then- Motion carries. Yes. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would move that the Senate Assessment and Taxation Committee pass out Senate Concurrent Resolution 1620 favorably as amended.
It's been moved by Senator Peck, seconded by Senator Kloss. Discussion on the motion. Senator Holland. We're saying something, so I thought everybody should enjoy your comment. Senator, any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. Would you like to be recorded?
Yes.
Senator Corson, Senator Holland would like to be recorded as noes. The chair will abstain. Motion carries. Any other business? I do want to work several bills tomorrow, committee, or Thursday, depending on time permit. Mike Peterson, Senator Peterson, point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to introduce two people that are up here paging today from my area, Dalian Horseman and Leah Jones. If you'd stand up for just a second and wave. From Heights and Mayberry. Thank you for serving today.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Baumgardner, on a point of personal privilege.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I want everyone to remember this name, Olivia. Olivia, please stand up. She's my intern this session. Olivia Gallegos. Olivia is running unopposed at this time for president of the Senate for Wichita State University. So she is an up-and-coming, successful young lady. Welcome. She deserves applause.
Well, welcome to the Tax Committee, both of you, and it's good to see you again, Olivia. Committee, we will be working Senate Bill 495, Senate Bill 543, Senate Bill 554, Senate Bill 556. That's probably enough for now. We are going to take a look at 374 and other bills that we've had. So I just thought I'd give you a heads up, committee. We do have some heavy lifting and little time left. So thank you for your work. We're adjourned.